topics and increase mutual understanding and really kind of give a voice to everybody so we can put ourselves in each other's shoes. We've today kind of talked about several different topics like school resource officer. We've talked about use of force, recruiting and retention. We've heard from the community on some of their concerns on some things. And it's been super positive. There are some new faces in here. My name is Sean Eastman. I'm a lieutenant with the Gaithersburg Police Department. It is No Shave November for the police department, for the Gaithersburg Police Department. So that's what you got going on there. Dan Lane, Officer Lane, not doing as well in the No Shave November. He's just got like a little patch there, like a Fu Manchu, some low budget kung fu movie, but it is what it is. So let's go around, and again, Sean Eastman, Lieutenant Gaithersburg. So let's just go around. I'm just going to go through my screen, call you out. If you could just introduce yourself real quick, because we got a couple new faces. The goal today is really talk about mental illness, mental health, and resources and training that the departments use to address that topic. And we have some subject matter experts, not named Sean Eastman. So we'll get into that. But if we could just start on my screen, starting with Ray Campbell, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Lieutenant Ray Campbell. I have the admin bureau at the Gaithersburg Police Department, so I handle like a lot of our policies and that kind of stuff. So I can chime in from a policy standpoint here and there. And I've got about 30 years in law enforcement.
And not participating in No Shave November.
That is correct. My Marine Corps background won't allow me to do that.
Hey, Joanne, where's the eject button? Is there an eject button? Somebody out of here. All right, Miss Scales, if you want to introduce yourself, you're next on my screen.
So my name is Jennifer Scales. I am a resident in Clarksburg, and I was invited to join the group by John. My 22-year-old daughter and I had organized a Black Lives Matter rally in Clarksburg. And so since then, I've been just trying to get more involved and helping make my community better.
Great, we're happy. That's great you're here. That's awesome. Thank you for joining us. That's cool.
Thank you.
Officer Jones.
Yes, I'm Officer Jones. I'm the Community Service Officer for the 6th District of the Montgomery County Police here in Gaithersburg.
Awesome, thank you. Elder John.
Hey, I'm John Stevenson. I am the church administrator right now at Victory Christian Church International, also radio host of the Vision for Change radio show. We were on Radio 1, and also community leader.
Yep, you've been a great part of this. We really appreciate your participation. It's awesome, it means a lot. Commander Ward.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having us today. My name is Mike Ward. I'm the commander of the County Police 6th District in Gaithersburg, and glad to be here.
Awesome. We got our positive hip hop artists and building leaders and advancing the community member. Matt, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hey, how y'all doing? My name is Matt Ross, Matt Diamond. I'm a representative of Black, and that's building leaders and advancing the community. And we're here together to start this conversation with the community and kind of bridge a gap between these areas that need to be discussed.
Good to see you again, Matt.
Good to see y'all.
Officer Davis.
That was not me. Yeah, hi, I'm Scott Davis. I'm a police officer with Montgomery County Police, and I coordinate the crisis intervention team. So my team supervises the mental health training for officers of all agencies in the county, state, really all over the place. And we assist the Montgomery County Crisis Center, HHS, and our nonprofit groups in bridging a gap between officers and persons with mental illness, resources, and stuff like that.
Awesome. We'll be coming back to you very shortly, so make sure you drink some water.
Sure.
There it is. Justin, how you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm good. So is this going to be a regular thing? Because I think Officer Vance lost his job. I think the MC is on Lieutenant Eastman from here on out.
Yeah, he needs some lessons.
My name is Justin Williams. I'm also a representative of Black building leaders and advancing the community. Thank you guys. Thank you guys so much.
Good to see you, Justin. Thank you for coming, man. As always. Officer Lane.
Hi, I'm Dan Lane, not Dane Lane, Miss Joanne. I am the Community Services Officer for the Gaithersburg Police Department.
All right, Dan. And a truly spelled Dan, Lieutenant Dan Helton.
How you doing, everybody? Sorry I was late on the call. I just got off another call, so I'm glad to be here. So my name is Lieutenant Dan Helton. I am really new to the 6th District Station, but I just left the Community Engagement Division for the Montgomery County Police Department. So I was doing a lot of outreach community-wide. I was born and raised in Gaithersburg, went to Gaithersburg High School, so I'm definitely local. So thank you very much for having me here.
All right.
Boo, Trojans, boo.
Yeah, we're the Eagles.
Eagles.
Man.
Eagles. Eagles.
Yeah, we have toe rings. What do you have? Okay, so all right, so Lieutenant Helton, that's great, man. Welcome to 6D. I haven't had a chance that Dan and I have talked off and on quite a bit, but haven't had a chance to welcome you officially. So glad to see you up here, man. All right, so let's go back to Officer Davis. If you wouldn't mind just kind of talking about like what kind of programs we have, when the training that kind of goes into it, how we would respond to a call, those type of things. So I appreciate it.
Sure. So I have a tendency to talk fast, so please, if I'm talking a little too fast, I see Kim laughing already. She knows me from way back when, and I just need to put it on record that Dan will be able to shave probably another year or two. So Dan will be all right. So yeah, so we have a crisis intervention team in Montgomery County. It's our 20-year anniversary this year. We stood it up in late 2000. And that stemmed from an incident in Montgomery Village where a mentally ill consumer had attempted to grab a gun off of one of our police officers that was responding with the mobile crisis team. Well, Health and Human Services at the time was before they were named the mobile crisis team. And unfortunately, the consumer was in crisis and there was a lapse in mental health treatment for the individual. He was not compliant with his medications and his therapy, and things went progressively downhill. So HHS had to do an emergency response for, check his acuity level and to see what his status was. One thing led to another, and he wound up trying to grab a firearm of one of the officers that was on the scene. Subsequently wound up getting shot because of it. So we looked into, my predecessor, her name was Joan Logan. That may ring a bell in several circles on the conference call. But Joan Logan was the one that put this together. Then Chief Moose at the time had recently retired from the Portland Police Bureau and had moved this way on the East Coast and was running our department for a little while. He had some limited interaction with crisis intervention teams, and Portland had one, as well as a couple other agencies he was with down in the South had CIT teams. So he tasked Joan Logan with looking into the program and seeing what we could do. With our huge diversity in the county, and the fact that we're so close to Washington, D.C., it's no big secret. Our census is 1 million county residents and probably 500,000 commuters from 3 or 4 different states. It's a big commuter base that we have here. So a lot of people come through, utilize Montgomery County services and live in the county. So it was pretty advantageous that they stand up some type of team that would help our officers engage with the community and give them some resources they needed. So Joan went to a 1-week CIT class. I'm sorry, was there a comment or?
Yeah, Scott, I think Diane has her hand up, but I don't know if that's intentional.
Okay. Okay. So we stood up a CIT class. And basically what we do is we look at what's called the Memphis model. So if you're really interested in this type of stuff, if you go to the University of Memphis website, they have several Department of Justice grants that they administer. They help out, do different things. There's a thing called the CIT Fusion Center. So if you look them up, everything you want to know and don't want to know about CIT teams is on that website. So Memphis PD is where it started. And basically what had happened is in a 1-month period, there was a situation where an officer was killed by a mentally ill consumer. And then a week later, an officer killed a mentally ill consumer. So University of Memphis and the Memphis Police Department partnership together, and they said, we need to come up with a program where officers and community members could better act, with the mentally ill community and get them the resources they need and get them the services they deserve. So the University of Memphis and Memphis Police Department put together a 40-hour CIT class. And essentially what that is they crammed an entire college or 2 semesters of college in a 1-week program. So we brought the officers in, and it's about 49-51%. So about 51% of the class is taught by mental health professionals, and these are licensed clinical social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, you name it. We also have consumer-driven classes where representatives from NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and people that suffer from mental illness but are able to function in the community successfully, they come in and share their stories. The other half of the class consists of site visits as well as officers telling personal stories. And these are officers that have interacted with mentally ill consumers on both a positive and a negative role. What went right, what went wrong, and then we close it up with scenario-based training. So we touch, you know, they went back and forth and said, okay, what are some of the topics we need to cover? And it came down to thought disorders, mood disorders, personality disorders, adolescence, substance use disorders, which is really very timely these days because SUDs or substance use disorders are very paramount, a lot of the calls we deal with. So we have a large influx of that, of co-occurring disorders where people are battling with a mental health issue as well as a substance addiction issue. So we see that. We also talk a little bit about pharmacology, and that's about, okay, the officers come on the scene or an individual identifies him or herself as taking a certain medication, what that medication is and how it could affect them on this call and how it could affect them down the road. So we want our officers to have a knowledge of that so they could really tailor the call to that individual. So it worked out pretty well. So we started it out in late 2000. We're what they call a hybrid model. So when you look at Atlanta and Memphis and a couple other cities, LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department, they have a dedicated CIT team where these are officers that are specially trained, like most of us here in the county, to go out and they answer strictly mental health calls. These are your suicide calls, your limited overdose calls, and just calls that are a little bit non-traditional in nature. So we are what we call a decentralized team. And what we do is, you know, we've never had the resources to be able to dedicate those officers solely for that tasking. Our team consists of me, another police officer, and a social worker that is on loan from HHS. We currently have 2 officers that are temporarily assigned with us, and the lights just went off. And so we work with them on a daily basis. When you go to major departments, that's all they do during the day is respond to those calls. So there's a lot of good sides and bad sides of both programs. A hybrid model allows us to train these officers up and send them directly back to their respective shifts and apply the skills they learned. So we have more of a presence out on the street. So there's more CIT officers out on the street at any given time, as opposed to a centralized team working set hours, right? So it worked out really well. Another issue was a burnout rate. When you have individuals that answer suicide calls and that's all they do every day, the attrition rate for that is about 5 years. After about 5 years, these officers need to be taken out and put into another unit because it could be a bit traumatic after you see this year after year. So that's kind of what we're about. Our team, we do approximately 5 trainings per year consisting of a week-long course. We teach anybody that wants to come from a law enforcement perspective. We've had, you name it, we've had agencies there, everything from the presidential detail in the White House all the way up to, you know, Rockville, Gaithersburg, Chevy Chase, obviously county. We teach outside agencies as well. So we've had Frederick County come down. We went to them and taught classes, and we assisted the state of Maryland in putting together limited assistance to their CIT programs. And they basically come to our class. They steal all of our PowerPoints. They steal all of our, you know, expertise. And we're fine with that. You know, we tell people, hey, take our PowerPoints, put your name on it. I don't care because it's for the common good. And they set these teams up. What's good about it is, you know, CIT is not a cookie cutter approach. It should be tailored for your city. It should be tailored for your population. And I think we do that pretty good here in Montgomery County. You go out Eastern Shore and you may have St. Mary's County and a couple other surrounding counties. They have a hybrid CIT unit where it's you know, composition of different agencies getting together. Harford County is the same. They'll have Aberdeen, Haverty, Grace, Bel Air with certain trained officers that are able to go around the county and assist each other. But we're kind of unique in what we do here in Montgomery County. I mean, everybody's trained the same way. So if you go through our 40-hour CIT class and you're a Gaithersburg city officer, we're on the same report writing system and we're on the same dispatch. So a county officer knows exactly what a city officer is dealing with and codification and different types of reports and all that. So it works out really well. We're all on the radio system, the same radio system, same channel. So we could go out there and, you know, assist them and they could assist us. I know Dan Lane's spent an intensive amount of CIT time with us, helping us out and doing stuff. So what's good is we have really good cooperation with Gaithersburg and Rockville and everybody else. If Dan has a problem with a particular case that he's dealing with in Gaithersburg, it's very easy for us to embed with his community service team and go out there and handle the case. And he does the same with us. So if there's any type of Gaithersburg City Police nexus to it, we could grab him and use him as a subject matter expert. So that's kind of what we're about.
Scott, can you go into a little bit of that 40-hour training block? I remember this training from early on in 2000s. If I can share this, like the first day was kind of a indoctrination by fire, if you will, right? They immediately put the headphones on you, and
sure.
If you want to go into that.
Sure. And it's noteworthy to say also, in our police academy, I'm not sure if anyone in the galley is familiar with the term mental health first aid. And if you're not, go ahead and Google that while we're talking. Check that out on your cell phone. Mental health first aid is another kind of a cookie cutter course that was put together by Mental Health USA. And what that is we have incorporated that into our police academy. So if a Gaithersburg officer or Rockville City officer goes to a Montgomery County Police Academy, they get 8 hours of that. And basically what that is it's a standardized course that's taught across the country to everybody. You could tailor it to your audience, like there's a law enforcement module, a veterans module, fire rescue, a school module, stuff like that. And basically it teaches people on how to recognize, not diagnose. It's important I point that out, not diagnose. It's important to realize that we see kind of like it looks like a duck, it kind of walks like a duck, but it barks, something ain't right, that type of deal. And that's what that course is about. So these officers are getting this 8 to 10 hour course in the academy as basically a good indoctrination. This is what's out there on the street. This is what you may deal with. Once they graduate the academy, that's when they start a 40-hour course. And just like the lieutenant was saying, the 40-hour course, one of the exercises we do is a distressing voices course. And what we do is we have a company that does, I guess the best way to put it is the owner of the company is a psychologist who suffers from schizophrenia. And she had created, through a bunch of grants, an actual distressing voices. So she had taken some of the auditory hallucinations that she experienced along with other consumers, and she put those together in a realistic training scenario that is initiated on MP3 headphones, earbuds. And what we do is we give these officers these MP3 players, they hear these voices. And as is such the case in mental health, the voices will initially start out as very appeasing and very pleasing, and then they get progressively worse. And these are actual experiences that the consumers have felt. And they've characterized it as sitting in a supermarket in the deli line trying to get some lunch meat, and something in your right ear is telling you that you're a loser and that you should kill yourself. And it's really interesting because what we do is we give these officers these MP3 players and these earbuds, and then we multitask them. We have them do reports. We have them interact with members of the crisis center, and the crisis center will do what they call a mental health status exam. They'll ask basic questions. And then we'll have them do word searches, puzzles. We'll have them do a test, stuff that they may experience, as a divided attention task. It's very interesting to watch how this kind of goes, and you see how quickly the officers get frustrated. You see, and police officers do a pretty good job multitasking. They do better than most people because, we're out there in the car listening to the police radio. Yes, we're listening to the stereo. Yes, we're looking at our mobile data terminals. Plus, we're looking out for criminal activity, and we're just trying to drive safely, right? So that's what we're doing out there, multitasking. So they do a lot better than most people, but they walk away from this experience frustrated. A lot of them have headaches, and a lot of them claim to hear a heartbeat. And what's interesting is at no time during the exercise is there ever a heartbeat transposed into the audio. It's really interesting. So that's one of the tasks. And basically the purpose of that is to let them know we're interacting with somebody in the community that may be in a state of psychosis or crisis. There's a reason why they're not answering us directly. There's a reason why they're not engaging with us immediately. And we teach the officers, give them time to respond, let them process what, number one, they're hearing initially, and number two, what we're telling them. So that gives them like, okay, wow, I never had that perception before. And as frustrated as I am, imagine living with this 24/7. It's not something that you could go home and turn off. It's not something that, you could choreograph and say, okay, well, I'll go to the supermarket, I'll probably hear this, So that's just one of the exercises we do. We have a pretty extensive course on thought disorders. That's your delusional disorders, hallucinations, schizophrenia, things like that. We do a couple exercises based on that. We have a pharmacology class, so we have a psychiatrist, Dr. Abby Morris. She comes in, talks about psychotropic medications, how they affect the person, side effects, and why people would take certain psychotropic medications and sell them, the illicit effects, stuff like that. So we cover that. We have a really extensive class on mood disorders. These are your thought disorders, or I'm sorry, mood disorders such as bipolar. We cover schizoaffective disorder pretty heavily. We talk about adolescence, about why kids act out, stresses of social media. We hit that pretty extensively. We do about 2 hours on that. We also talk about, we have a suicide by cop block. We talk about hostage negotiations, i.e. what a negotiator should think about on the scene when they're dealing with somebody that may barricade themselves in a house, that may have a thought or mood disorder. We go over the interview techniques for the family. We talk about intellectual developmental disabilities. We talk about people on the spectrum, the autism spectrum. We talk about ASDs quite a bit, autism spectrum disorders. And we really hit the entire tracks of, we call them personality disorders. We hit those pretty heavily too, because they're very prevalent in society, especially these days. So we hit a lot on personality disorders. Another thing we do is we do site visits. So one of the things we do is we take our officers over to Shady Grove and we hit the specialty referral center. That's the psychiatric hospital that's attached to Shady Grove. So they do a tour, they go in civilian clothes, they do a tour, and they basically see where the consumer goes. i.e. if a person is admitted involuntarily to a hospital emergency room for a psychological evaluation, they see the entire steps, where the patient will go after they leave the emergency room. They see the type of living conditions and they interact with the staff. They have an option of interacting with some of the consumers on the floor as well. So while we have officers there, the other half of the group is sent to Springfield State Hospital up in Sykesville. And that's a dedicated state emergency, we call it a specialty care referral center. It's a psych hospital. And these are individuals that are up there for competency restoration. These are people up there that are what they call forensically involved. And these are individuals that committed a crime based on their mental health. So they may have been in an advanced form of psychosis, or they may have been manic and they may have committed a crime. So instead of putting them in a jail environment, we work very carefully with our state's attorney and even our public defenders, believe it or not, to get them into a forensic healing environment. So I don't agree that people, this is Scott talking, I don't believe necessarily that people that commit crimes as a manifestation of their disability should go to jail. There are individuals that for their safety need to be taken off of the street and not put in society because they could victimize other people as well as be victimized themselves. So one of the things we'll do is we'll work with the state's attorney to get them forensically evaluated. And they try to what they call restore. So they try to get them in some semblance of normalcy or bring them back to their initial baseline so they could understand the judicial process and protect their rights. So that could be a period of 90 days. I mean, there's people that have been up there for 3 years. I mean, it's pretty intense. And it's a custodial environment, meaning that they're not free to leave, but it lacks the bars, it lacks the entire prison atmosphere. It's pod style, so they interact with other patients. I mean, it's a hospital, it's just a forensic hospital. So we have a lot of Montgomery County, unfortunately, up there. It just happens to be the catchment areas is Montgomery County, Carroll County, and Frederick County. So we send a lot up there. It's a good way, and it preps them for our mental health court too. So if we have a mental health court case, that assists them in getting them ready for their court case. So we visit that. Another place we go up to Clarksburg, to the mental health facility at Clarksburg. Our Montgomery County Corrections Facility, a lot of people don't understand that we have a psych unit in the jail. So if we have a individual that commits a crime, let's say it's a first degree assault, let's say they're involved in a weapon. I'll give you a case in point. We ran a case of Potomac where the individual was, he was immunocompromised, so he would get infections very easily. He was also battling with schizoaffective disorder. So he got into what they call a septic shock situation where he got an infection and he went to full-blown psychosis. So he wound up stabbing his mother 3 times. He almost cut her wrist off, the whole deal. Anyway, we worked very heavily with the state's attorney. We got him cleared medically and we got him up to Montgomery County Correctional Facility to be evaluated. While he was up there, he was placed into the psych unit of the jail, which kept him safe and kept him safe from other people. So they do have therapists, they have clinicians, they have a psychologist that goes up there. So if an individual is placed in the crisis intervention unit in the jail, it's important for the citizens of Montgomery County to understand that that therapeutic environment doesn't end. It continues in the custodial setting. And Clarksburg is notorious for doing that. They've done a very good job. They've won a bunch of awards over the years of providing good care. And what's good about it is if they just happen to be sentenced, let's say they are competent to stand trial, they go through the judicial process, and let's say they get 6 months in Clarksburg. While they're in Clarksburg, they'll get all the therapy they need and also get follow-up care. So before they get released, Clarksburg will meet with pretrial services. They'll sit down with them, and what they'll do, they'll get with the pre-release people, and they'll actually get them a therapist. They'll get them a psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever they need. So it's kind of wraparound. It's a really good program. So we do all that in our CIT class. We do that in 40 hours. And then finally, we followed up with a written test, because in order to have what we call training hours in police work, we have to have what they call a P number, which is a police training number. So we have to do a written test. They have a, I forget, I think it's a 25 question written test. I wrote it and I always forget how many questions it is, but I think it's 25 questions. It's a fill in the blank. There's no multiple choice. So it is very challenging a lot of times for us because we have to research that information. So we do a written test, and when it's all said and done, we spend the final day doing roll call scenarios or role play scenarios. And what we do is we bring the officers in a room, a very big room. We sit in there, and what we do is we do scenarios. So we have our crisis center therapists pose as the consumers, and we present the officer with a real case. Okay, you know, Officer Davis, Officer Jones, you're being dispatched to the Metro for an individual that is screaming on the platform of the Metro. We simulate it, and boom, me and Officer Jones have to go in there and handle that. And what's good about it is these aren't make-up scenarios. These are based on actual cases. So every single scenario we do is an actual case that has occurred in Montgomery County. So it's pretty cool. And no two resolutions are alike. Everybody handles it a different way. And what's good is if the officers, you know, maybe stumble a little bit or hesitate, we could coach them on what the right response may be to do. And we gauge them, we grade them, so they are evaluated by their peers. They're evaluated by the crisis center therapists as well as the the leaders of the course. So we evaluate them. It's not a pass or fail. It's what could we have done better or what did we do good, that type of deal. So there are situations where we've had individuals that, you know, will have to go through the scenario again just to reinforce some of the training that we've talked about. So we do all that in 40 hours. So the officers in Montgomery County, and that includes our municipalities and our cities, they're getting about 48 hours of mental health training prior, well, just either they're getting 8 hours in the academy, 8 to 10 hours in the academy, and they're getting additional 40 hours once they come out of the academy. So at one point, up to about a year ago, we were the only county in the state that had that training requirement. So if you carried a taser and you were a school resource officer, that was an additional 10 hours of training. So at one point, our school resource officers in the county, number one, they had to be CIT certified to be a school resource officer. That was intense because there's a lot of children in crisis, as we know, in schools. And having the officer at the schools was an excellent way to head off any problems. Because the officers, the counseling staff at the schools knew that we had the ability to kind of fast track services for those, you know, for the children. And I mean, I could go on and on with success stories in the schools. I mean, I was a school resource officer for about 2.5 years. And at one point, and I'm not by any means taking credit for this because it was a team effort through the county police, our school, my school cluster had the most mental health intakes for the entire county, just my school cluster. And the only reason I'm saying that is because we identified issues that were taking place in the schools and we got kids the help they needed. I mean, and kind of my take on that is having officers to that level of training, it says a lot. And for a while there in the state of Maryland, no one came close. Everybody's starting to catch up because, you know, we gave them all our PowerPoints. I say that jokingly, but they're catching up and they're getting pretty good at what they're doing now. So we got to one up them and continue our training a little bit better. Someone had put something across the board there, asked if there were psych wards in all jails. Most jails in the state of Maryland do have a crisis unit. I'm not too sure about Frederick County because that's one of the smaller jails. I know Allegheny County as well. They do have mental health services. So they do have therapists and counselors that go to the jail and assist consumers that may be in mental health issues or inmates. but I'm not sure if they have dedicated psych units. But I know we do, I know Harford County does, and I know PG County does as well. The bigger counties do. So I hope that answers your question.
Is there continued training on the mental health after that initial 8 and 40 hours? Is it like an annual thing at all, or?
I think you hit my question that I was going to ask too. Yeah, that was something I had on my list right there.
No,
I mean, I'm an accountant and I have to take 40 hours of continuing education every year. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think because Officer Eastman said his last remembering of his training was in early 2000s. So what's the ongoing training kind of look like?
Yeah, that was that specific training. I know by our policy, we do it at least every 3 years, but I'll let Officer Davis weigh in on that. We do ongoing training.
Right. Right, Lieutenant, you're right on. So the Maryland Police Training Commission, just like professionals that are in healthcare or social work or whatever, we do have to do continuing education a lot. I don't think a lot of people understand that. People say, well, you know, the officers are only getting 6 months of training. That's not true by any means. Any officer that's on this call right now could tell you, you know, hey, we got to go to the academy. First thing they do is roll their eyes. You know, we say that jokingly because it seems like we spend a lot of time in the academy. And that's because we do have continuing training. So the Maryland Police Training Commission says that we have to have mental health awareness training every 3 years. We do it usually every other year at a minimum, and that exceeds the requirement. And anything new that comes up, we address right away. So if we have a change in the law, if we have a change in a procedure to a hospital, we do an entire training on it. What's interesting, sir and ma'am, what you were pointing out is we actually have our social worker attend roll calls. So when we fill out our emergency petitions, and emergency petitions are basically forms that allow a Maryland police officer to take a person against their will involuntarily to a hospital to get a psychological evaluation. So we give the officers additional training on that because oftentimes when that goes, a lot of people don't understand that there's a backside to that whole process. There's an adjudication process. So when a person gets sent to a psychiatric or an emergency room for a psychiatric evaluation, if they're admitted to the hospital, they have a right to a court hearing within 7 days. So if any of that paperwork is messed up or the procedures won't followed appropriately, then the Office of the Public Defender could contest that, and that consumer, whether or not they're stable or not, will get cut loose immediately. So think about that, right? So if an individual is in psychosis and refusing to take medication, the hospital, because of a procedural error or a clerical error on the paperwork, that person could be actually set free and go out there and get them, you know, be victimized or be off their medication or get hit by a car. So anytime something new comes up, we address it right away. I think everybody that's law enforcement that's in the galley right now can attest. We just cut loose some new training not even 3 weeks ago. So, and that was updated on the emergency petitions. So what we did was the state changed up the procedures a little bit. We immediately put together a PowerPoint and we kicked it out on our database or our in-house training system. So we will do stuff. Officer Lori Reyes, I don't know if you guys know her or not, but she does our autism and our intellectual and developmental disability outreach. What's good about that is Lori is constantly updating training and we kind of assist each other on stuff because of the whole co-occurring stuff. So we have individuals that, of course, have autism. They may be on the spectrum, but they also have a mental health condition. So you could have somebody that has autism or is on the spectrum and also has a thought or mood disorder. So we deal with that constantly. And if the officers identify certain things that are needed for training, our team is trained to be able to put together a custom program. And we're working with Gaithersburg on some additional training right now, kind of a hybrid CIT course because of COVID. A lot of what, we're restricted to what we could do. But I mean, to answer your question, short and sweet, we're constantly updating and refining training. And if we see something that is lacking out in the field, rest assured we address it. The national statistics say 1 in 5 people have a mental health issue. And that could be as simple as an anxiety disorder. And that could be any one of us in this galley that may take medications for anxiety. It could be a substance use disorder, whatever the case may be. So it's important for us to be able to provide that service because at 3 o'clock in the morning, who's available, right? So if somebody goes into some type of crisis, a mental health crisis or whatever, a family member dies or they're just off their medications or something happening where they got an infection and they become psychotic, it's very hard to get your therapist at 3 a.m. in the morning, your doctor at 3 a.m. in the morning, but the police are there. and we could muster our fire rescue resources to get them to the hospital. We could at least get them treated. So the officers know enough to be able to kind of slow things down a little bit. I kind of hate to use the word de-escalation. I hope I don't offend anybody by saying that, because I think that's a very token, very politically motivated term these days. But I slow things down and kind of choreograph my scene. So the officers are trained to slow things down, look at the big picture, and mobilize their resources prior. So a good officer will know to summons fire rescue, get the stage, have fire rescue stage in the area, and then we'll go in and handle the call, and that way the resources are there available right away for us. So we're constantly updating stuff, constantly getting better. I hope.
And another component to that training aspect is, I know we do it at Gaithersburg, and I've encountered the same thing at our county in-service training that we go to, is a lot of this gets built into our scenarios as well. So when we're doing the training scenarios that involve either like use of force, taser, defensive tactics, or whatever, there's almost always a mental health issue kind of scenario built in there as well. So in addition to the documented training, we're also getting that in the scenario training.
Officer Campbell, I was going to ask that question. We gave a training at the church for mental health, and a lot of us did not know, most of us was thinking psychotic. We wasn't thinking depression, alcohol, drugs, all that is classified as mental health. And my question was, how often is that implemented into your training? Because we're seeing more of that, especially now with COVID. People are dealing with depression. We know that domestic abuse has definitely gone up. And some of that will fall into the classification of mental health crisis. And I was going to ask, does Gaithersburg have those scenarios built in? I was told years ago by a friend of mine who's a Montgomery County police officer that if they get a call for domestic abuse, they have to go full sirens on. Maybe Kim and some of you all could speak to that, because that could lead to murder. And so I wanted to know, how often are we having those trainings? Because we see a lot of that at church. And I wonder how often you get those calls in Gaithersburg.
We get the calls every day. But as far as the training scenarios, pretty much anytime we do our use of force, our taser, and Lieutenant Eastman can tell you a little more about the rotation of those, how frequently they are. Because some of it is annual, some of it's biennial.
Yeah, let me go into that real quick. So I mentioned this before, that we really focus, and I know Montgomery County does a good job of this as well. We don't train in what we call silos. So when we have firearms training, it's not just firearms training. It's also taser scenarios and defensive tactics scenarios. So you can go to a firearms training and run into a domestic, somebody who's on drugs, somebody that's in a mental health crisis. Same thing with taser or defensive tactics, because we don't want to, our training is effective in that we don't want you going to a firearms training and only doing firearm scenarios. That's just reinforcing using the firearm, where it might be a de-escalation, it might be a taser, it might be some other type of use of force. So we're constantly looking at national issues too, and kind of going, hey, how can we replicate this, this complicated issue? And I think Officer Davis hit a key point before too. We are not, even though we get all this training, I'm not giving a diagnosis of whatever mental health crisis that person is in. I'm just recognizing that something is going on, and then that can dictate how I approach that scenario. We do that in all scenarios across the board all year long. And as a training cycle that Lieutenant Campbell was talking about, it really is a 12-month training cycle, because you go like the first half of the first part of the year is taser, then we go right into firearms and defensive tactics. It's just continual. So we're constantly just building on these scenarios. And I'll let Officer Davis also weigh in on that, or whoever else in the panel.
Sure, sir. Just to hit on what you're saying, I mean, it's very important we kind of really highlight that. We do not diagnose. We can never diagnose. We are, in our team, we have one social worker that works for the entire police department, and you could line us all up in one line, and there's only one person in that line that's allowed to diagnose, and that's our social worker. But we have enough training to realize that, okay, something's going on. Sir, you had brought up about substance use disorders and stuff like that. We're seeing that more and more today, especially with COVID. You're absolutely right. Depression is on the rise. Those calls for service, our team is exceptionally busy. I mean, it's nonstop for us. And please keep in mind, for a while there, we weren't even allowed to come to work. You know, we were trying to handle these calls where we would come in just to handle the call, and then we went back and, you know, went home and teleworked for the rest of the day. We're still doing that. But we're spending now more time in the office, I think, than we ever have, coming in and working with our crisis center counterparts. And I mean, the calls for service are drastically up because of COVID. And it's important to realize, yeah, I mean, as soon as people start, you know, being told to stay out the street, stay in your house, that's when the domestics start, and alcohol, drugs, mental health, all that plays into one big mixture, and it can be very caustic very quickly. So, you know, the officers are trained to realize that in addition to the domestic, okay, there may be a mental health nexus to that. We know everything about that's going on with the opioid crisis. Opioid deaths are kind of stabilizing a little bit, and I think that's largely due to the doctors not prescribing as much. But we're seeing an increase in illicit opioid products coming out. And we realize, you know, once we get these individuals to the hospital, we realize, well, in addition to a substance use disorder, they've been battling depression, they've been battling all sorts of stuff, you know, through their lives. So it's important. I'm kind of a one-stop shopping guy. I would rather have an individual be assessed and treated at one point, because for a while there, if you recall, a couple of years ago, maybe 8 to 12 years ago, the state of Maryland disbanded their substance abuse administration and merged it with behavioral health. And that, I think that was actually, in retrospect, a really good thing, because it provides what I call point of service treatment. I don't agree with the fact that an individual in Montgomery County may have to go down to Silver Spring for an 8 o'clock appointment for their alcohol problem, and then at 2 o'clock in the afternoon they have to be up at Clarksburg to see their therapist. That's ridiculous. How can anyone manage that schedule that's battling with a mental illness? I couldn't do it. You know, throw in, you know, not having a car or having to use the public transportation, whatever the case may be, could be pretty debilitating. So I like the idea of hospitals and the crisis center exploring the opportunity of what they call restoration centers. And these are point of service centers, I call them. And basically these are individuals that could be admitted to there. They're not acute enough to be sent to the hospital ER to tie the ER up and make that poor person wait hours. They could be assessed immediately, and they could be given the resource for mental health and substance use disorders. They could, i.e., they could be treated on scene, and I think that's a great thing. So it's tough. I mean, we're seeing these calls for service increasing, and now we're going back into phase 2 of COVID. So I think those calls are going to start going up again. And the people that are coming into the hospital that are mentally ill and they're being brought in, unfortunately, folks, they're a lot more violent than they used to be. I mean, we are literally having to wrestle with people on the ground in the ER now. It's gotten really bad over the last couple of months.
Are you finding that you're servicing different communities more than others regarding some of these mental challenges? Interestingly enough, it's the same across the board. It's amazing what we're seeing coming to hospitals. I mean, we're seeing if you go down to off of Route 29 of Silver Spring, you're seeing a large amount of influx of students from the University of Maryland now. We didn't see that before. A lot more kids coming through now. And if you go up to Clarksburg, I mean, you're seeing a lot of geriatric population too. We're seeing more geriatric patients than we have ever before. And that's because, you know, they're limited to their accessibility to different services because of COVID. They're not able to do telemedicine's a big thing. I'm not sure if we're familiar with telemedicine or not. That's a big thing now, and that's becoming kind of the way to go these days. But it's very difficult, as we see here. I mean, I'm looking at you folks on a cell phone. It'd be very hard to gauge your reaction and how you're really feeling without seeing you in person. You know what I mean? So I'm seeing it across the board. I'm seeing right across the board, everyone's getting hit with this. Everybody.
Well, I guess, can you kind of say, I think we had a good segue. Can you kind of take a step back and tell us kind of how those calls start? Like from the beginning of a call, you get a call, you know, you have to assess what this call is about. You get on scene, how do you prepare in regards to it being a mental health, you know, distress call?
Lieutenant, do you want me to answer that, or?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, I mean, depending on how the call goes out, That's a very difficult question because no two calls are the same. I don't know if you want to talk about a particular example, or I could throw in a case I just dealt with.
No, I think I kind of want to lead into more of, you know, why. Let's get to the nitty gritty. Why we're really here. We're really here because there's national headlines of people getting shot. They get to a scene and it's different than what you hear on a call, right? So I'm trying to kind of gauge for the public, what does a typical call look like when you get a call for domestic disputes? Is there little hidden gems in there that you can figure out? This is a possible mental health distress call, and then once you have that thought, do you switch gears into well, let me get this person on board, who do I call there? Or is it just all hands on deck, let's just go kind of thing?
No, well said. Your point of us not getting all the information is a great, that's phenomenal. If we got more information prior to us getting to that call, I'm a big supporter of getting as much information from that dispatcher or what I'm looking, because you know our calls are sent to us on the mobile data computer as well. So we hear the dispatcher talking. We're also looking at what he or she is saying on the computer. So a lot of the information is conveyed to the computer. So I'll know if the individual, hopefully I'll know if the individual has alcohol or drugs on board. That tells me a lot. That tells me, okay, so I need to get there. I need some additional units, stuff like that, whatever the case may be. And if I know this person is suicidal, that's big, right? I need to know that because now I need to slow things down a little bit and realize, okay, I don't want to exasperate and make the situation worse. A lot of times, depending on how that call goes, just think about it, right? So if there's a domestic and this individual has been drinking and he or she is fighting with their significant other, okay, they're already fired up over the fact that they're drinking, they're mad about whatever the issue is. Now the officer shows up, right? So now you have lights and sirens, sometimes not, depending on the call. Some officers will park farther apart than others. It's all individual preference on how to respond. And then we get there, and now you have an officer in a uniform that's kind of telling you how to run your life and do your thing. So that exasperates a little bit more. Now that officer has to kind of bring that person down a little bit. Okay, I don't want to make this worse, and I certainly don't want to fight. I'm 50 years old. I'm not about fighting. So I want to try to bring this individual down a little bit. And, you know, sometimes, believe it or not, it's as easy as saying, how can I help you? It's that simple. But it really depends. If, you know, we use that term de-escalation. It's a two-way street. It's very easy for us to de-escalate because we could take a step back and we had time on our side. For the individual we're dealing with, that's not always the case. If they're under some form of psychiatric distress and you throw in drugs or alcohol on top of that, it's just simply not feasible a lot of times for them to de-escalate. They don't know to be able to do that. So, you know, we have to try to isolate that individual and basically get them to a safe location. If I know that that person has a mental health nexus, I'll do what I call a choreograph my call. I'll start getting people, and what we'll do is prior to going into that house, we'll say, okay, Officer Jones, you're going to do this. Officer Ward, you're going to do this. Officer Davis, you're going to do that. Because having a plan means everything. And then we go in there and we do what we need to do. Again, if the big thing is, you know, we have to be safe. I think everybody understands that. We have to make sure we're safe because we never know. There's been tons of calls. And I mean, I've been with Montgomery County 18 years. I've been a police officer for 28 years total. I came from the federal side. So I can't tell you how many times I've been told there's a weapon on scene and there's not. And I can't tell you how many times I've been told there's no weapons on scene and I get a gun. So you just never know. These cases are so dynamic. Go ahead.
So Officer Davis, that would be interesting because now when we're talking about the training, would the dispatchers be involved with this as well? Because all you have is what they tell you. And so you're making a move based on all you got is what they tell you. So if, I don't know, are they trained to get the right information, to give it to you all so you guys go prepared onto the scene?
Like maybe like a specific list of questions when you hear a trigger word to ask further questions into it to give you more information?
Yeah, so again, phenomenal question. So back in 2001, after September 11th, 2001 happened, there was a lot of issues with different agencies, like especially around the Pentagon and New York City, not being on the same dispatch system, not using the same terminology. This department uses 10 codes, this one doesn't. So what happened is the federal government got together and they, I'm trying to think of what the heck the name of it is. they started using a thing called NIMS, and it's a National Incident Management System. And what that is exactly what Matt said. It's basically a checklist, and our dispatchers use that. It's a checklist. Okay, if the person says this, go to this chart. They flip the chart, they start asking the questions, right? The problem is, I don't think since 2000, it's 2001, I think it's updated effectively, because I think that times are changing. I think that the incidence of substance use disorders are going up. Like, we have a thing called excited delirium. I don't know if you've ever heard that term or not. That could be another hour of talking about that, because I teach that. But that is different things that individuals do on scene. Disrobing, taking off their clothes. Okay, that's important. So if I hear a dispatcher tell me that, and we've initiated that protocol in our dispatch. So in the old days, well, we had an individual that is in the road running around and they're incoherent and they're not responding to commands. Okay, so we would run lights and siren, get there and deal with it. Now we ask these questions. Okay, is a person naked? Are they disrobing? Are they sweating? If so, number one, that's an automatic code dispatch for fire rescue. That's great. So now I'm getting fire rescue started. Takes them a few minutes to get out of the station, right? But those 3 or 4 minutes that it takes them to get ready could save that individual's life. So we have that coming. Another thing is, based on that, if we have somebody that may be under the influence of PCP, or they may be in a state of cocaine-induced psychosis or psychosis in general, I could tell the officers, and the supervisor could do this, kill your lights, kill your sirens. We're just going to come up. We're going to get there quickly. We're going to get there and we're going to approach, without exasperating the situation. Because we know from medical documentation that sometimes lights, strobe lights, LED lights, and what I call shiny bling, which is your badge and all your collar brass, sometimes that reflection could agitate people that are in that state of delirium. So that could actually make things worse. And now they're getting combative. So the National Incident Management System was a great thing, but I think finally dispatchers are starting to do their own thing and say, hey, we need to do this. Do we run our dispatchers through CIT? Unfortunately, we try to, but they've been so short-staffed over the last couple of years, we haven't been able to. So what we do is when they are doing dispatcher training, we give them about a 2 to 3 hour block on mental health disorders and what to look for. A lot of those dispatchers will take their own time off and come to our training. Like when we do the mental health first aid course, that's an 8-hour course. Their supervisors will let them come and take care of that. So we're constantly looking at how to refine that. I do know that our emergency communications, and Captain Ward, feel free to chime in, is now under the police department. So I know that we've initiated a bunch of new protocols to kind of update our dispatch and get them where they need to be.
Hey, Scott, if you could expand on one thing for everybody else here about why it is so important that we recognize some of those clues to get fire rescue started early, why those few minutes can potentially save their lives because of the excited delirium situation. Can you expand on that a little bit more so that they understand?
Sure. The term excited delirium was coined, believe it or not, way back in I think 1809. There was a doctor named Luther Bell. He coined the term, and basically what it came into, it's a drug, mental health, or septic-induced delirium, where an individual is out of mind, out of body, they're not in control of their functioning, and they basically wander and they get very agitated. Certain things may agitate them worse and worse, bling from collar brass or strobe lights or badges, or it could be something that, like the case I talked to you about earlier about the guy who stabbed his mother, he was septic. So he had gone into sepsis. He had a blood infection that caused him to become psychotic. The reason why it's important that we try to get that information on the dispatch level is because I need to get fire rescue started, because at that point, I don't know how long that person's been in that condition. And also, side note, I'm also an EMT, so I've got that background in medical training. So I kind of, hey, this is something serious. Time counts when you're dealing with a patient in that condition. And we know if they're in the, if they're in the middle of the street, it's 10 degrees outside and they're disrobed and they're naked and they're sweaty, that's somebody I need to get to a medical facility right away. I could care less about the crime if there is a crime. We could worry about that later if it's even applicable, right? I need to get that person medically stable before I do anything. So when the officers are responding to that scene, we're not responding, realistically, we're not responding because they're naked in the street. We're responding because that's abnormal behavior and it may be medically induced. So we're getting there because we can get there faster than fire rescue generally at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I laugh when I say that because Montgomery County, there's like a firehouse every 10 feet. And even at 4 o'clock in the morning, they generally beat us there. They're so fast in this county. It's just amazing. But, you know, the officers have a little bit of competition. They try to be fire rescue. But anyway, we try to get there, and it's important that we get those resources started, because I know if somebody is in that state, they're probably going to need some chemical restraint. They may need some Ativan or some ketamine. They may need a medication that brings them down enough to, number one, stop that high body temperature, because if they go into that high enough body temperature, they could go into a cardiac arrest or a stroke. So seconds count. So the officers recognizing that and getting that on the dispatch level, that's imperative. I mean, I could cut 3 to 5 minutes off the treatment time. That means a lot, because at that time, when they start getting in that type of physical distress, seconds count. Seconds count.
Yeah,
And that means
what you're dealing with there is truly a medical emergency. And that is our first priority above any law enforcement objective.
Absolutely.
Is to ensure that they get proper treatment. And without that sedation, without the tools that an advanced life support unit from fire rescue can bring, you get there and next thing you know, the police are having to struggle with this guy because he's being dangerous or being a danger to others. And that just causes this to get even worse. And if you don't have fire rescue on the way to give him immediate treatment, it could end in a fatality without it being gun, taser, or any other tools, just from the struggle. So that's one thing that I think we've done in this county and with the city very well in recent years is training our officers to recognize these things and our supervisors to be listening on the radio for these details in the calls and to get these additional resources started right from the beginning.
You know, sir, I got to say this. I mean, I play Gaithersburg up a lot because I really love Gaithersburg PD. And on a side note, I was 3 months in the academy when Gaithersburg called years ago and hired me, but I was already in the county police academy. I ran a call maybe about a year and a half ago in the Kettlands where somebody was in an excited delirium state. I responded because we just happened to be driving by. It was right off Great Seneca Highway. We responded, me and my partner, and Gaithersburg was there as well. And those were so, you know, we trained together, so we knew what to do. I didn't have to say a thing. I went up there, assessed, and right away, one of the Gaithersburg officers knew to run downstairs and get 2 things. He got Narcan and he got his AED, his defibrillator, because we don't know what's going on at that point. We want to be able to have those tools. If the person overdosed, we could Narcan them and administer the antidote right away. Or if they go into a cardiac arrest while waiting for fire rescue, we could start the CPR and defibrillation. So it's kind of cool that we do that, be able to go on a call like that. So I was really impressed with that. But yeah, I just had to throw that out. I'm sorry.
Can I ask a quick question? Because you mentioned, I think you said like ketamine and having that to help reduce. Are there restrictions and guidelines that you guys have in the field? Like you hear the story of like Elijah McClain, and you know that was a contributing factor. So I was just curious, what are the parameters?
So the only thing our officers are allowed to carry is Narcan, and that's through the HHS program. I actually administered a $200,000 grant for Narcan a couple years ago and got about 200 officers trained in it. So the only thing the officers are carrying is Narcan. When you start talking about ketamine and Ativan and other types of, sedative type of medications, that's a fire rescue issue. So I will tell you that fire rescue was looking at a ketamine program. And I know the state of Maryland was looking at incorporating it into the medical protocol. But yeah, each patient is different. They have to base it on vital signs at the time, because I know Ativan in certain patients that are compromised cardiac-wise could exacerbate a heart attack, I'm not going to go into all that. But yeah, we will never be in a position where we could tell fire rescue to use chemical sedation. We could always recommend and say, hey, we got this guy into custody. We've got him handcuffed for his safety so he doesn't flail and attack us anymore. Or he doesn't hurt himself or other people. He's handcuffed and we need transport to a hospital. Fire rescue may do something as simple as, icing the person down to lower the body temperature, or if it's an ALS unit or advanced life support, the paramedic on scene may use their standing orders or their protocol to say, okay, at this point, patient's doing A, B, and C, I need to administer ketamine or I need to administer some other drug. So, just to clarify, folks, we don't administer medications. We have no right to tell fire rescue to administer medications. You know, the only thing we do when fire rescue arrives is we provide security and safety at the scene at that point. It's a fire rescue operation. So whatever they decide as far as treatment, you know, we go with. The only additional thing we would do in that situation is ride in the ambulance with the patient.
Can I jump in real quick?
Thank you.
That's the reason why we want fire board on the scene so quickly. It's because they are the only ones that can administer medication and provide that type of service. A question might be then, why is this not just a fire rescue call? Why are the police involved in the first place? And the answer to that has to do with the fact that the firefighters and paramedics have no authority to stop or detain anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a joint call between law enforcement and fire rescue. And people that are suffering from a mental illness that's causing them to behave this way, whether it's biological or chemically induced like PCP, they pose a danger to themselves. They pose a danger to the rest of the public, running in and out of traffic, assaulting people. Our role is to get there quickly, assess the situation, make sure the medical resources are also responding and staged and ready. And then we have to stop the person, and they're not cooperative. You know, nobody in this situation is cooperative where they're going to comply and do what anybody asks them to do. So frequently, you know, we do end up having to detain them and then quickly turn them over to fire rescue as soon as possible so that they can start treating them and get them to the hospital. It's really a joint effort from both entities.
Thank you, Commander, for elaborating on that, because I know that was definitely a question out there of why both parties are going to be involved and why only mental health people aren't showing up on the scene versus police too.
And I can expand on that, and Scott, maybe you can as well. There's a lot of talk lately about having mental health professionals take over for a lot of the things that police do. And this applies there as well. The police are definitely a catch-all in our society. We are, you know, responsible for quite a few different things, and we're not the master of any of them. But neither can anybody else. There's no easy answer to any of these situations. And even if we had more social workers, which I wish we did, they would not handle these calls by themselves. There would still be a need for the police to go with them. They have no training in any type of defensive tactics, and they have no authority to stop or detain people. So if we had more mental health professionals working with us, like they do in places like Los Angeles, Scott, I think they have about 100 social workers on the street out there.
Yes, sir.
And they're much bigger than we are. We definitely need that, but that does not take the place of law enforcement. We would still have to be involved right alongside with them. There is just no situation where we can take the police away and substitute something else. It's just not possible.
I think you actually hit on a very important topic that I think a lot of people also want to know about, and it kind of gets us into the solution-oriented process, right? One of the bigger issues in our county is that there's limited resources to that, and there's only one crisis center. What do we need to do as the public, as the community, to try to get either a balance, a good balance, or what is a good balance? Maybe you can, you know, speak to that, because yeah, you're right. You can't do one without the other. You need the protection. You need. It's a village organization, but you have everybody saying, get rid of the police, bring in the health professionals. We know we need both. How do we go about doing that and getting more of one or creating a better balance?
Yeah, so early on in the conversation, Scott, I'm going to come back to you if you don't mind here in a second, but early on in the conversation, I was actually going to talk about, have Officer Davis, Officer Lane, talk about what resources are out there first. You know, what do we have existing? So we know it's, you know, you mentioned the crisis center, you know, in the city, we also have what's called the Wells Robertson House. We have a local resource. So let's start there, if you guys wouldn't mind kind of addressing that and then moving forward. So either Officer Lane or Officer Davis, whichever.
Dan, go ahead.
So yeah, we have the Wells Roberts House that we work with. That's directed by Mr. Jimmy Frazier Bay. We work with their staff quite a bit in training and in recognizing some things. And then we're also working with them on coming up with different resource booklets. Officer Davis and I have been conversing recently about coming up with a booklet to provide to officers on how to identify certain things and then what they can do. And then we work with our community service staff which is next door to Well Roberts, about how do we get information out to our communities. Our community service staff, that is strictly the city department, has been great in working in the communities that are underrepresented and things like that. And they're always reaching out to us asking, how can we get information out to those people? So we're always looking at ways to do mobile caravans, if you will, where we pop into the neighborhood, giving information, sending stuff out via email or on a letter blast of some sort, and then working with Scott Davis and his staff on what we can do to kind of better involve people. Scott, you want to elaborate some more?
Yeah, so in addition to what Gaithersburg have, and if you guys want to write this down, I was throwing some lists up while Dan was talking. Obviously, statewide, there's 211. You could dial 211 for resources, and that connects you to a local resource. We have the Crisis Center, and just to throw it out, obviously the number for the Crisis Center is 240-777-4000. We have a lot of nonprofit groups in Montgomery County. One is very dear to my heart, and that's NAMI. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I'll talk about them briefly. NAMI is a grassroots provider. They're nationwide. There's not one part of the country that isn't serviced by a NAMI provider, but each county, each chapter of NAMI kind of does their different thing. I laugh and joke about NAMI because I call Montgomery County NAMI the militant NAMI because they're so assertive and they're so aggressive. They do a great job. If you get on NAMI Montgomery County, look at their resources. I worked very heavily with them over the years. Full disclosure, I haven't probably worked a case with them in over a year and a half because of COVID and some other things going on. But NAMI provides an incredible resource. So if you have somebody that's struggling with mental health issues, there's a big stigma that's associated with that, right? Everybody knows that. We see it in police work. I saw it when I was in the military. People don't want to come forward and say, well, I'm anxious, I'm depressed, I'm having issues. My awakening was when my father passed away and I started lapsing a little bit of depression, and that was manifested by having a short temper. And come to find out in males, especially older males like me, depression is manifested by anger. So that's a key sign of depression. I was able to get that recognized and take care of it. So it worked very well for me. So NAMI does a very good job, and all the services that NAMI provides are free. Okay, if you call the Crisis Center, kind of look at the Crisis Center as a 7-Eleven for mental health. You don't necessarily need to go in. You could talk to anybody 24 hours a day, and they could give you a recommendation or they could connect you with a service provider. There's also the Core Service Agency, and they're on the county website. They're, at the time before COVID, they were walk-in, and they were a little bit like the Crisis Center is more for acute type stuff, like true crisis, where the Core Service Agency is, okay, I'm struggling with this, I need some resources. I could walk right into a Core Service Agency and get some resources. So that's kind of how that goes. Dan talked about Well Roberts. We have a couple other places like Cornerstone Montgomery. There's the Mental Health Association. There's Family Services. The thing about the mental health providers in Montgomery County is we have, and I think it was Justin that brought up about, having more resources available and not just one crisis center. Well said. The only issue with that is every time we put in a grant to get additional resources, the federal government says, oh, you're Montgomery County, you have everything you need. Sorry, we're going to go to someplace else. It's truly amazing. And I've had people that I know that were on the grant team said, hey, I'm giving you a phone call before you get the official notification. You guys got too much resources as it is. They want to give to somebody that has nothing. And a good comparison is adult protective services, right? Montgomery County has a very robust adult protective service agency. Frederick County does not. And if you look at between the two, it was 2 or 3 social workers up in Frederick County that handle adult protective services issues. Down in Montgomery County, it could be as many as 20 or 30. So that's pretty amazing. So, we have it better than most resources around the state. I'll never tell you we have enough because we never will. The thing that's going on, with defunding the police and different things, they want to chapter money away from the police to mental health services, and that's fine. I mean, I have no issue with expanding our crisis center, and that's being done. So we're getting more mobile crisis teams. And it's important to know that at any given time, the crisis center has 2 mobile crisis teams. One that doesn't leave the crisis center for walk-ins, right? So that's 24/7. and the other is that goes out in the community. So if you have a family member or you yourself are having a crisis and you need to be seen and you're not able to get to the crisis center, they'll send either a therapist, a behavioral health tech, even a psychologist. We have psychologists that work at the crisis center. They work mobile crisis because they like being in the community. They'll come out. Now, just like Captain Ward was saying, there's a big push to kind of have social workers and mental health providers respond by themselves. So there's two issues with that. Number one is if they're at an acuity level so severe, they may be a danger to themselves or others, that puts the crisis center worker at risk because they're not trained to recognize what we are. They don't have the protective instruments. They don't have the ballistic vests. They don't have the equipment that they could keep themselves safe. We do. So I think having us respond up there. And one thing I changed years ago when I took over the CIT unit was I requested when I do public presentations, I say, look, if you're going to call the crisis center, if you have a loved one that might be in a manic distress or psychological distress, save time. Don't call, this, that, and other thing. Just call the crisis center, let them know what's going on. It's one-stop shopping. If the crisis center comes to your house, they're going to send a police officer or two, okay? That's fine. But what I tell the population is request to the dispatcher that they send a CIT trained officer, okay? And that's important because officers in Gaithersburg, Rockville, and Montgomery County, we wear well, I don't because I'm not in uniform, but if they wear a uniform, they wear a CIT pin above their name tag, or on their outer vest, they'll wear a little patch that says CIT. When you see that, they're trained. They've been through the class. I can't think of any time since I've been on where there hasn't been a CIT officer, trained officer working a shift. And we could always request resources from other districts as well, or even the city, and they could request for us. So, having the social workers respond by themselves can really exacerbate that situation because now the big thing about, freedoms that we're given is you could say no. You could say no. If I'm in a manic state or I'm having auditory or visual hallucinations, and I think that the CIA or the FBI is following me, and I have a social worker that wants me to go to a hospital, no, I'm not going. Who are you to tell me? What do we do then, right? The social worker backs off, calls the police. The social worker can't take you into protective custody and involuntarily take you to a hospital. They could write the paperwork, and they do, but they can't physically take you. They don't have that training. They're just not able to do it. So now we have to step in and do it.
They don't have the legal authority to do so.
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
Nobody does. The firefighters have no legal authority to take somebody into custody. The social workers don't either.
Yep.
So while there's always, in my opinion, the need for more resources, taking from the police to create those resources is a recipe for disaster because there will never be a time where we need the fewer police. In fact, we always need more. I think that message somehow gets lost in the conversation.
Patrick, I'm going to piggyback on that. No two budgets are created the same because Gaithersburg Police doesn't have a lot of money going to. We don't have a mental health component. So, like, if you're talking about like saying like 25% of each department's going to go here, well, okay, that's great, but understand that 90% of or over 90% of our costs at Gaithersburg are just personnel. They got to pay me. You know what I mean, Justin? They got to pay me on time.
90% of all police budgets, all law enforcement budgets are spent on salaries and benefits. There's not a lot of wiggle room in police budgets for.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when you start talking about diverting funding in police budgets, one of the first places it's going to get hit is our training budget. That's the low-hanging fruit. And really what you need is, police officers that are professional and well-trained, like Montgomery County Police and Gaithersburg Police and the other municipalities here in the region. You don't want officers that are getting less training, and those training budgets get cut first.
So Justin, let me circle back around because I think half of your question is still out there. Like you're saying, I like how you approach things because it's always solution. Like we've talked about it. Now, how do we solution? Yeah, what's the solution? I've picked up on your method of madness here. So, and I think Officer Davis was really great. Like I think the suggestion It's something I hadn't really even thought about, which I was maybe even taking for granted, like ask for a CIT trained officer if you're going to call. I mean, that's like good information to get out there. I think you also were looking at it as like, you know, what can we do, or how can we help advocate, or whatever. Is that half your question? I thought you maybe.
Yeah, and I think it's more or less, you know, and I'm glad you picked up on that, because you know, it's not always sitting around complaining about a problem, right? You know, and what I'm trying to do here with you guys is bring the solution to the community, right? You know, if you hear a public outcry of, like you said, I mean, this isn't always necessarily my personal view. This is what the public I'm hearing. This is what the people are saying. Defund the police. Let's get the mental health people. This is what they're saying. So to all of the professionals in the room that are saying, don't defund the police, we need more, then what do you tell them as a solution? What is something that has been circling around that you say, okay, how do we attack this problem that Officer Davis has clearly said is an increasing problem? And guess what? It's modern day, where that's probably going to be a even bigger problem a year from now, and it's going to multiply over time. Where do we start?
So Mr. Williams, if I may, my solution is real simple. Restoration Center. That's where it's at. HHS and the police went down to San Antonio a number of years ago. We looked at their restoration center. And again, these are semi-medical facilities, semi-custodial facilities that are able to handle persons that are in acute crisis that may not rise to the level of involuntary hospitalization. And they're also individuals that may be high, inebriated under alcohol. These are, I mean, people call them detox centers. You call it whatever you want, but the thing I like calling it is a restoration center or a point of service center. We were looking at that. Robert Green was a director of corrections for a number of years here. He went on to the state level, but he was in a process before he got promoted out over to the state level of kind of blowing off the dust off the plans. HHS is back and forth on whether or not, you know, that's helpful or not. But I like the idea of being able to take an individual to a centralized point, and this center would have to be set up in a part of the county that's accessible by all parts of the county, from Poolsville all the way to Piney Branch to Silver Spring to whatever. The same amount of travel, in my opinion. And basically, this would be an area where we could address the mental health and the substance use issues right then and there. They could be medically stabilized, and i.e. given Narcan, you know, to take home with them once they come out of it, or to be able to be evaluated for a period of up to 12 hours. There's a lot of pushback on that of the mental health community, and it's split down the center. A lot of therapists love the idea. A lot of therapists hate the idea. And one of the reasons I hear that they hate the idea is, well, that might take away my job. That might take away my, you know, this and everything. But in the big picture, honestly, we're about public safety. I could
That's okay.
You know, I could care less. I'd rather, you know, I don't know if anyone in the galley here has a family member with a mental illness. I mean, yeah, so I have a young man that's 8 years old that had epilepsy and has had, you know, 1/4 of his brain removed. He's learning disabled. And I do not want to be in a situation where he gets older and I'm gone and he doesn't have the resources to help him if he goes in a crisis. That concerns me. And it should concern everybody, because I don't think as a society we're addressing that. And you could go all you want back to behavior on how kids are growing up and what they're taught. Okay, yeah. That doesn't help us in this room right now. We need to deal with how are we going to get these people the help they need and maybe change that behavior, right? With some positive vibes or some positive stuff. Get them the help they need, let them be evaluated. I just hate the idea of what I see now of the decentralization of treatment. You go to the hospital ER, you get assessed, you go to another facility to get treated, and then you get another facility for outpatient, partial hospitalization, whatever you be. I hate that idea. I'm by no means a socialist, but I think there's no issue with we should be able to, as a county with our resources and the budget that this county has, to be able to put that together in a centralized location. That's my take. So maybe that answers the question, but I think we need a centralized point of service to address the acutity of the situation and then move on from there.
I wanted just to make 2 points. I think a big answer is just access to mental health. You just asked about if anybody has family members with mental health issues, and I do. My daughter's probably only alive because of Montgomery County Fire Rescue.
Sure.
who responded to her 22nd suicide attempt while I was out of the country. So access, because ultimately I had to take her to Chicago, Illinois to have her have the level of treatment that she needed. So access, but then my other question is, at what point and how do we get to a point where every officer is CIT trained so that we don't have to know to ask for a CIT trained officer when we call 911?
Good question.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I can tell you that all of our officers to carry a taser will go through CIT training. We make that mandatory, so that, but we have a small department, so I'll let Officer Davis address his department.
Yeah, bear with me. I'm running to the office because I'm down to 50% on my phone here. And it was fully charged. Man, I tell you, these Zoom meetings just kill you, don't they? With the battery?
They do. Yeah, I'm on the charger right now. They do.
I'm connected right now. Bear with me 1 second.
Officer Lane, did you have anything to add on that? Oh, there you go. Officer Davis back. Good.
Okay, so you know, the national, we follow the national CIT model of best practice, if you will. That doesn't necessarily say that it's in the agency's best interest to have every officer CIT trained. And when Chief Major was here, we had a meeting with him, the state's attorney, John McCarthy, and a couple other people, a couple of the judges, and we had went over about if the entire department should be trained or not. I was the only one in the room that said no. I think it's a specialized skill. And I'll put this in perspective, right? We have traffic investigators from Montgomery County Police, right? And I'm sure Gaithersburg has reconstructionists as well. You know, every agency has one. These are officers that are trained to use different types of like total stations and learn how to do laser measurements and all that neat stuff for a traffic accident. I'm not the guy for that. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not good at that. So if I was forced to go through that training, I probably wouldn't be very good responding to your traffic accident and investigating that. However, I would know who to call to make sure it was done correctly. And that kind of says the same for the police department. There's never really a situation where, again, that there's never a CIT trained officer out there. So our team gets calls daily. I mean, we answer probably on average about 5 calls per day, and that's just consultations on the phone, not counting, you know, nonprofit groups like Cornerstone calling us. These are from officers on the street. Hey, I got A, I got C, I got D, but I'm missing B. What can I do to connect this, you know, the dot? We'll give them the information they need and the case is solved, or that person gets to where they need to go. Same thing for fire rescue. They'll call us about certain things. They'll call us to go out there and, you know, assess patients that they have a high ratio, you know, of patients calling every day for the same call. So we go out there and help them. So I think officers that have the training, my experience is I've seen some officers out there to get the CIT training, and a lot of that is based on personal experience. So if you grew up and you experienced some type of childhood trauma and you go through a CIT class, or you have a family member with a substance use disorder, it's amazing on how quick you'll see this officer suddenly sit up straight when that topic is brought up. Like, hey, we're going to talk about pharmacology. Well, guess what? I have a dad who was an alcoholic or A, B, and C. So I think by making the program voluntary, which is what we do in Montgomery County, well, at least for the county officers, municipalities and the cities, you know, like Gaithersburg, it is mandatory. That's okay. I have no issue with that. But I think from a quality control issue, I think the officers give a little bit more passion to it, if that makes sense.
They're specialized. They're better at it because they actually have an interest in it. It makes sense.
That does make sense.
I mean, I'm trained in CIT. I have a CISM background, critical incident stress management. I was on a peer support team. I may still be on it. I'm not sure. I'm also a negotiator on a hostage rescue team. So it all comes together for me. And I'm able to, you know, when one of us from CIT responds to that scene, a lot of us are negotiators on the team because we understand mental illness, and we go there and we're able to resolve that situation very quickly. You know, thank God we have that skill, and thank God we're, you know, able to apply that. But I mean, it's a passion. I'm not the guy you want investigating your insurance claim because you ain't gonna get no money from me. but if you need a good resource for a hospital, I'll do my best. I'll do my best to get you where you need to go. Because I mean, I've always, you know, this isn't propaganda by any means, but I say this when I teach at Citizens Academy. I mean, a citizen of Montgomery County Police has an expectation that if an officer responds to your house, the call should be handled professionally and it should be handled the right way, the first time. You shouldn't have to call for a supervisor. You shouldn't have to call back 911 to say this wasn't done correctly. And we take pride in that when we do our training. It's like, look, these people are in crisis. This may be the one time that you break that barrier for whatever reason, a prejudice, a predisposition, whatever you want to call it. They may say, wow, I never knew a police officer knew this much. Case in point, mm-hmm. and I got to throw this out, right? I'm in the elevator at Shady Grove Hospital yesterday, and the lady was going from the 5th floor to the 1st floor. I was on the 2nd floor. I got on the elevator, and she started asking me questions about, she goes, hey, how do I get copy of police body cam footage? I'm like, oh, well, you have to check with our information services and support, records people, they'll take care of you. She goes, well, my boyfriend was brought in because he was psychotic. And of course, that automatically had me look over. I'm like, okay, do you mind telling me about the case? We talked for an hour and a half in the lobby yesterday at Shady Grove Memorial Hospital, Shady Grove Advanced Hospital. It just happened to be right two people we just met, and she's like, I had no clue you guys knew this much about this stuff. I'm like, well, this is all we do. I mean, we deal with this every day. I mean, the secret's out, folks. Mental health calls are a surprisingly high amount of calls. And I don't think a lot of police officers, when they join the police academy, know that. They think they're going to be catching a bank robber, getting a drug dealer, stopping the guy from destroying whatever. Surprisingly, most of the calls they're going to run are mental health calls. It's just how it is.
Thank you. Anyone who hasn't asked a question, any questions? I know we're getting up there in time, so get your questions out now.
I guess, Justin, I did, I want to bring back full circle to the communities. Different communities have different emotional needs, different things that go on. And it sounds like we're very limited with the CIT trained officers. And I know, I'll just give an example. When I was young, I didn't have a crisis. I just was one of those kids. I lived in Rockville, 12, 13, I was going to run away from home. I just got tired of stuff at home. So I ran to the Glenmont police station as if they could rescue me some kind of way, And so they, one of the officer detectives talked to me, but they felt like, okay, there's an African-American detective that could probably relate better to him based on what he's dealing with emotionally and all that. So they had a guy named John Boston talk to me. And I guess he did, he wanted to take me back home. And I was like, no, we can't do that, brother. My mom was going to kill me, but he was able to relate to me and talk to me. And I think, and this is my opinion, when we have certain things, especially what's going on, we see a lot in the media, and we know the media has a lot of influence on how everybody's thinking. Right now, race is a big concern in our community. And so I want to know if you're somewhere out in a more Hispanic community, would it be in the best interest to have somebody that's Latin that can go out and speak to the people there, or you're somewhere where it's more African Americans and they're dealing with this? Does that make a difference? In my opinion, I think it does. It depends on what the case is, but I want to hear from you, Officer Davis, what you think in those situations.
Right. So I've done a lot of presentations over the years. What to do at CIT? Shoot, I don't even remember how many years I've been doing CIT. I've tried to get out, and people like Captain Ward are forcing me to stay in. I'm just kidding, sir. But anyway, I do a lot of community meetings, and I've been to the Latino Advisory Committee, all that stuff. And generally, most of these officers that are facilitators of these meetings are of that race, Latino, African American, whatever the case may be. I don't know. I mean, I've never had an issue bridging with the community, but I could maybe emphasize with what you're saying. I mean, I joined the Army at 17, and I was in the National Guard with a bunch of guys from East Baltimore. So I learned very quickly that you don't play race out in the field. I learned that very quickly. I had a father that was very, quick when I was growing up to say, you judge people based on their character and not their color. And this was a career military guy, served in Vietnam, the whole deal, Silver Star, all that stuff. So, I don't know if I'm an exception. I don't know. But I know that I think the way you come off on your community gives you credibility. I think if you show empathy, and I think you show concern, I think that should be able to bridge the racial gap if there is one in that particular meeting. a lot of our officers work part-time at Shady Grove and White Oak Medical Center. And if you look at the populations that come into both those hospitals, and I work with hospitals, I moonlight there part-time. It's amazing the diversity in Shady Grove that doesn't take place in White Oak. And you see predominantly African Americans and Latinos that come into White Oak Medical Center. Very few white, German, Russian, whatever. Shady Grove is just the opposite. So it's been interesting because I've had no problem engaging with the community at all in either of those hospitals. Again, it's how you come off. It's a genuine concern for the community. And, if you want to have an officer from that race there to facilitate the meeting and start off, then so be it. But it's important that, if we're all there, I mean, we as a police department, I used to tell the kids when I was at SRO at Walkersville High School, I used to say, you may be a gang member, but I'm a member of the biggest gang there is, and that's Montgomery County Police. Like, we all wear the same colors.
Scott, can I jump in for a sec?
Yes, sir, please do.
So you hit the nail on the head with this issue, and we address it, I think, more at a higher level than on a call-to-call basis, and it has to do with our recruitment, hiring, and retention, and the important reasons why we try very hard to have a police department that represents the community that we serve. So I don't think we're in a situation where we're responding to a call where we can pick an officer who's going to respond any more than we can pick who we're responding to see. But we do work very hard to make sure that our department represents the community, that the odds are better that any particular officer responding to any scene may fit the situation better. And there's always more than one officer that responds. One thing I wanted to ask you, Scott, for clarification on, somebody mentioned that it didn't seem like there were many CIT trained officers. I think there are. I mean, in addition to the pins that Scott was describing or the CIT letters on their outer vest carrier, if you see a uniformed officer in Montgomery County carrying a taser, they're CIT trained, and most patrol officers have tasers. Yep. So in terms of that CIT training, I don't know what the percentage is, Scott. I don't know if you're prepared to say.
I do.
More often than not, if you're dealing with an officer in Montgomery County, they are probably CIT trained.
Yeah, so Captain Ward, we have 100% of our officers are trained in mental health first aid and or CIT. So if you look at the numbers, breaking it down, every one of our department members have mental health first aid training, and approximately, and I just heard this number 2 days ago, and it's over 760 officers, over 760. It might be 780 that have CIT training. So that's well over 50. That's like 70% of our, well over 70% of our department.
So the county police department, and I'll let Gaithersburg talk about their stats if they can. We have 1,300 sworn. That's our official number, about 1,300. And when you factor in detectives and officers that don't work in uniform, officers that are not frontline patrol officers, that's several hundred right there, leaving us, I forget what the size of our patrol complement is, but the vast majority of them are in fact CIT trained, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah, and our agency, everybody except for probably the last two graduating academy classes are CIT trained. And the reason the last two aren't is we just have not yet had the opportunity to get them through the training. There's been some restrictions, especially, this year with COVID and, other demands for training. But as soon as we were able to get them into that, they will also be trained. We strive to be at 100% on that. And I wanted to speak to one thing, Pastor John, that you mentioned there, is I kind of try to look at our job and reaching out to the various communities that we are here to serve as, we are called to minister to those communities. And, as you minister to the communities in your church and outside your church, compassion and truth transcends everything else. And so I think that when we come into a situation and we are ministering to someone, from our perspective, that compassion and that truth and that desire to get them the help that they need in that moment should be able to transcend any race or cultural issues. Certainly there are going to be some things that maybe I could say a little bit better, or maybe I might not use a word that I don't know is offensive, but it is. There could be some small things like that, but I think the sincerity and the compassion and the truth of the message oftentimes does transcend the other barriers.
Cool, Elder John, that answer your questions?
Oh, absolutely. I thought about, there's a lot in my head when it comes down to some of these mental issues, especially the thing we saw a couple weeks ago in Philly with the young man with the knife. And, I, as an officer, I'm not sure what I would have done based off the training that we had, last month, Officer Jones and Officer Lane. I probably would have yelled police as I did. Only correctly.
The other thing to remember, the other thing to remember when you see these incidents on TV, these terribly unfortunate incidents where officers may be in a situation where they have to use that kind of force, or believe, at least in that moment, they had to use that kind of force, is that you guys are seeing on the news the worst case scenario. Mm-hmm. You are not seeing the, thousands upon thousands of times that the police successfully engage with someone who is homicidal, suicidal, or otherwise a danger to themselves or others, that are successfully resolved through de-escalation, through the techniques that we use. You don't see any of that on the news. You're only getting the worst of the worst. And when I say the worst of the worst, I don't mean that they were the worst people, but they are the worst of situations. Oftentimes where someone loses their life or comes incredibly close to losing their lives. It's not newsworthy if it doesn't reach that. But just remember when you're seeing these things that they are not indicative of the professionalism and the standards and the way that the police generally, in most instances, by far most instances, engage the communities that they serve.
Mm-hmm. Okay, in light of time, we had talked about these meetings. It's great that we can come together and powwow and I think this conversation was great to give insight and some understanding to the people who are watching and listening, and of course us involved. But we want to be able to take away action items and things that really physically materialize from these meetings. I think I got a couple of things that we had talked about. It sounds like there's an issue with spreading information about things outside of being a crisis center and creating booklets for officers. So for both parties involved, right? Because PACT is now standing for police and community together, right? So there's two sides to the coin. Can we come up with some action items that both sides can come up with to try to bridge that gap in what is needed in the community?
So one thing I would recommend is if the public is serious about maybe exploring the opportunity of a restoration center, what we talked about, please realize that we are more than happy to be on that steering committee, whatever it may be. I've been on it for years with the Mental Health Advisory Committee, so that commitment will always be there. I mean, I'm not saying that's what the police department's going to do, but I can tell you, as long as I'm in my position, I'll always advocate for that. So, I mean, and I do, monthly in our Mental Health Advisory Committee. So that's one thing. I mean, you've got my commitment as far as helping with that.
Officer Lane, there was something that also came up before this call. We were looking for the last call. I think you said you were going to post it up on the Facebook page for our City of Gatesburg. Is there an easy access point so that people who are asking about these kind of meetings can get, to be able to see them and view them? Yeah, so we worked with our city PIO office. We have a Gatesburg YouTube channel. So all that we can do is after we get done with this whole kind of this meeting, basically what happens is our technical facilitator will email it to their staff, and then they upload it to the Gatesburg YouTube channel. And then as soon as I'm told that that's loaded, I'll send it out to the group so we can share it. We're going to try to
baby steps. This step we tried doing the chat room function. We only, as you saw, we only had like really one person engaging us. You know, so I think we'll try that, and then maybe move up to the next step of letting people kind of raise their hand, and then we can let them be heard audibly. And I know you talked about, Justin, about doing the Facebook Live, or what was it, the Facebook Watch?
Yeah, I think the gentleman had asked if we were sharing this, and I think that's, you know, access, right? It's what you're exposed to, and if you have access, you might chime in more, you might understand more, you might share it more. And I think that's just kind of like the next action item, right, for this is how do we get it to more people so that way they can be more involved? The Facebook sharing option, I know that you can create a watch party on Facebook and then share that yourself. I don't know if a Zoom call is exclusive where you have no access so you can't share social media, but maybe that's something to look into for the next meeting.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk to our city staff, because I know we had done our first council and communities meeting last week. And that was one of the questions, was if we could do a Facebook live stream with it. I think we were able to. I just don't know the technical aspects of that. But I will talk about steps, you know, to see if that's something possible. The other thing is I want to put to you guys is, what's the criteria we want to meet for panelists? Because obviously, you know, you guys are the folks who've been organizing a lot of our rallies. And then we have our staff from the police side. But I have had other people from the communities want to join, like, you know, Elder brought on Ms. Scales. And then Sarah wanted to bring in 2 people from her community. And so things like that of, what do we want to make as the criteria for us to have panelists? Because I don't want us to have like 15, you know, 25 people on here kind of thing. But I want to make it where we all are having some kind of impact and things. Because I do like the fact that we have action items at the end of the meetings to kind of come up with.
And that's kind of, what we were talking about. Like, if we end with these action items, then that way we can begin with follow-ups on these action items. So that way we're being progressive and active. Because, you know, like I said, the powwow is great. Say, you know, the 2 hours I get to sit here and look at your face, you know, it's great. But, you know, what comes from it, you know? And we want to be able to present, hey, to the community, this is what came from that. And I'm sure on your side, you want to know, hey, this is what came from that, right? I think we can probably we got a whole nother month or so before the next one. I think we can definitely get in some email conversation and really kind of see how we want to grow this. And we can definitely follow up at the beginning of the next meeting, because I'm sure Ruhi, I don't know how to say her last name. Sarah. Right?
Sarah. What did you say, Sarah?
Yeah, Sarah. She couldn't be here today with us, but I'm sure she would definitely want to bring some people. And, you know, everybody's going to want, but you can't have 100 people in here raising their hand talking.
Exactly.
This is the NAACP meetings, right? So we can work that out. I think it's the fact that it's growing. Thank you. I think it's Commander Ward. Did I see? I know I think you're new in your position over in the 6th district. So it's great to see you. You know, I was a big fan of Commander LaCory. So, you know, got some big shoes to fill, but I'm glad to see you here. You know, and like I said, this thing is growing, so that way we can bridge that gap, as Matt said in the beginning, and we just got to find ways to do it. So we'll work it out.
Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to the upcoming meetings. And yes, Commander LaCory, good friend of mine. We went to the academy together. I'm very happy to have been chosen to take over the 6th district. If I can add one thing, in terms of takeaways, I think the biggest takeaways, and I'm speaking on behalf here of Gaithersburg City, who were kind enough to invite us to work with them in this meeting, are things that are intangible. You know, giving us the opportunity to meet the people that we serve and explain what exactly it is that we do. Any knowledge that gets passed in a format that builds relationships of trust, that's the biggest win of all, as far as I think we are concerned. And that's not something that we can hold. So I think that's already happening, and I'm very happy to be here and be a part of it. Thanks for having us.
Cool. Anybody have any lasting words, questions before we tap out here?
Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Officer Davis, because that was
thank you.
Right.
That was a plethora of knowledge.
A lot of great information.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, when you asked issues. Yeah, between me and my brother, I've been at the crisis center, I've been at the Shady Grove, I've been at all those places, and to hear it, you know, and have a little bit of experience involved, and then to hear how deep it goes, it really means a lot. That, you know, there is thought to all of this. It's not just going about your business every day. It's people that really care and, you know, are really trying to get to the bottom of fixing things and creating better situations.
Yep.
Cool. Well, I got to get back to my regular job. So thank you again, guys. Of course, Dan Lane will be in charge of everything else from here on out, right? From here until the next meeting.
We're not meeting in December.
Yeah.
We decided for the holidays we take the day off, but we'll have the next meeting in January. I will send everyone the email on that. And then if you have some agenda items or some things that you want to discuss for that meeting, think about it. Any guest speakers you want to add? I know Scott has mentioned Officer Reyes from our autism section. So if there's some kind of thoughts to that, absolutely, Officer Reyes is an awesome another person to talk to. So
we can't even touch on. I mean, she's amazing. She'll blow you guys away. It's amazing.
Right. Can I also ask that, you know, if we're thinking about a criteria for the group, that maybe we can have a timeline or a deadline that we can say, hey, let's have an email all to send to Officer Lane, or maybe a group email that we can say, okay, this is what we're thinking, and create that so that's at least established before the new year. Is that okay with everybody to kind of toss out some stuff?
I can email the group because, you know, Sarah wasn't here and things like that. So I can email the group and say, hey, here's, you know, what the question was, and get some suggestions and things like that. Do you guys want me to share your emails? I know Justin and Matt said that's not a problem. It's only for the internal group. It's not for public knowledge. It's only for all of us to talk.
I don't mind.
Yeah, okay. I'm fine. I'm fine with that.
Yeah. All right.
Officer Ray, thank you, sir. I love the way you explained it, gave that answer, man. You gave it. You sound like a minister.
You know, I actually am.
Okay.
So, but it was a pleasure to see you all again. I know I've only been able to make it to a couple of these, but I'm hoping to be on as many of them as I can going forward. Great to see everybody again, and looking forward to talking to you all again in January, and we'll get some email communication going on between now and then.
Okay, cool. Okay, gang.
So,
Kim, I like your head, Kim. I like your doll. So, all right, folks, we will see each other all in January.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful holiday.
Take care.